Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the next installment of the Lilja and Lou's podcast. This is episode number 20, which is kind of special for us, our 20th anniversary, I guess you could say. And to celebrate that, we've got a chock-full podcast for you. Hans, why don't you tell us who our special guest is going to be for this episode?
Our special guest is Charles Ardai, owner and creator of Hardcase Crime publisher, who just released Joyland.
Excellent. And as a cherry on top of that, besides the news, we're also going to give our thoughts on the pilot episode from Under the Dome, which aired last week. And at the recording of this podcast, the second episode is going to air tomorrow night. So all that, so stick around. You don't want to miss it. Charles talks a little bit about Haven as well, but mostly about Joyland and Hardcase Crime. So some great stuff coming down. So stick around.
Welcome, welcome. Do not fear the door that lies before you. We will protect you. We are your guides, Hans and Lou, and we will give you the latest in Stephen King news. But before we do so, you must prove yourself worthy. You must open the door and join us in the death room.
And it's time for the news. Today we have quite a lot of news for you. We will start with Under the Dome, the premiere episode has aired. As expected, there was a lot of coverage of it, both from Stephen King and the other creators and actors. And so if you go to the site, Lilja's Library, you will find a lot of video clips and interviews and other stuff. Among them, an open letter from King himself explaining the difference between the book and the TV series. So you will find all that on the site.
And I'm calling all opera fans, especially those that live in the San Francisco area, if you're into opera, guess what? Stephen King's story, Dolores Claiborne, is going to be performed as an opera at the San Francisco Opera from Wednesday, September 18th through to November 4th. Tickets will be going on sale July 8th. And this is an opera that has been arranged by Tobias Picker and Andrew Welch. The libretto has been written by J.D. McClatchy, and if you know the story of Dolores Claiborne, and it's already been done as a movie with Kathy Bates, who of course made her cinematic debut with another Stephen King project, Misery. The movie was quite well done, and yeah, it'll be very interesting to see or hear reactions to somebody doing Dolores Claiborne as an opera. And I can't say that I know this person, Dolores Zajac, who's known as a powerhouse mezzo-soprano, will be playing the title role. So it's a very good story. I have to admit, opera's not one of the things that I'm into, but if you are into opera, this might be something a very different take on a King project that you might want to check out.
Yeah, I agree. I'm not a big opera fan, and to me it's quite strange to do opera of Dolores Claiborne, but hey, who knows? Might be a big success.
Yep.
Next up, King did a Q&A for CBS when Under the Dome was about to air. During that Q&A, he revealed that he is now halfway through a novel called Revival. So we have yet another novel coming up. And for those of you who wonder, it has been confirmed that this is not a new title for the Mr. Mercedes book that's been mentioned earlier. So this is actually a totally new book.
Cool.
So
at least 2 more books.
Yeah, exactly.
More, please. We want more. Never satisfied.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, were you going to say something else?
No.
No? Okay, so then, keeping in line with books, of course, we're all waiting for Stephen King's next novel, the sequel to The Shining, Dr. Sleep. And if you go over to Hans' site, you can see a short little trailer promoting the book, and it's calling back one of the most famous images, the red rum image from the original Shining. As well, Hans has links up there from in-paper illustrations for the Cemetery Dance version of the book that were provided by Brian Freeman. And I assume it shows a train, and one's like a amusement park train, where you sit in the cars, but it's the car is very small, and there's a girl looking over the caboose at the teeny town railway, and I assume that she's the character in the book that the 40-year-old Danny Torrance is trying to protect. Apparently she has very strong psychic powers that these trailer people want. In the second image, you can see the train being driven by the engineer with the moon behind the smokestack and some spooky-looking people in it. So these are Glenn Chadbourne illustrations, so you know that there's a lot of detail in them, and they're very evocative and very moody. So check those out. They're lovely-looking illustrations.
Yeah, I want to read that book now. So
yeah, amen.
Yeah. On to movie news. A Good Marriage, based on the short story by Stephen King. I have so high hopes for this movie. I love the story. The news is that Theo Stockman has joined the cast, and he will play the son in the family. And I don't remember a son in the family from the story. Things are happening with that movie, and as I said, I really hope this one will be as good as the story.
Mm-hmm. San Diego Comic-Con is quickly approaching, and Under the Dome and Haven will both be making appearances there. For Haven, it will be a nice way to drum up enthusiasm and interest for the season premiere, which is coming this fall, and that will be on Friday, July 19th in room 6DE, so that's 6 Dog Edward, at 3 p.m. So for all you Haven fans, make sure you check out that panel at the upcoming San Diego Comic-Con.
Yeah, on the site, Lilja's Library, there is a short clip from the Haven people promoting their Comic-Con appearance, and I will urge you to watch that clip to the bitter end, because there's an extra funny moment at the end. So watch it all the way. And lastly, we have sad news. Richard Mathewson has died, which is very sad. Mm-hmm. And King wrote a short tribute to him that you can read on stephenking.com and on Lilja's Library. So it's sad. He wrote some great novels.
Yes, he's a writer that really should be much more famous than Stephen King, really. Over the length of his career, he's given us so many great stories that most people don't even know that he wrote, probably. You know, going back to when Steven Spielberg did a movie version of Duel. Matheson wrote so many stories for The Twilight Zone. I still remember Nightmare 20,000 Feet with William Shatner. And, you know, The Incredible Shrinking Man, I Am Legend, which has been remade several times, the latest version with Will Smith. Just a fantastic writer whose breadth of work is just staggering. He's a writing legend in my mind, and he will be sorely missed for sure.
Yeah. Okay, that ends our news segment.
And now, we visit the King Crate and see what Miss Treasures, the Fluffy the Crate creature from Creepshow, has left for us.
Now we're joined by Charles Ardai, who's the founder of Hard Case Crime, who just recently released Joyland, 8 years ago, The Colorado Kid, both by Stephen King. We're going to talk to him a bit about these Stephen King books and more. So, nice to have you here, Charles.
Lovely to be here with you. I've been reading your site for many years, as you know, and we've been collaborating for 8 of them. And I'm delighted to get on the phone.
Yeah, it's great. I think you were with when I did the interview with the Haven gang.
That's right. I just consider myself a smaller portion of the Haven enterprise than of the Hard Case Crime enterprise, so I feel more like a star of the show and less like a side attraction.
Yeah. And Lou, have you spoken to him? Have you?
No, I have not. This is my first time. Nice to meet you, sir.
It's a pleasure to meet you, sir. I was just saying that as the connection was breaking up. I apologize. One of you I know well, and one of you is brand new. And the one who's brand new has an icon on Skype that looks like it ought to be played by Harrison Ford and Angelina Jolie.
Yes, that's a video game, The Last of Us. It's out on the PlayStation 3 right now.
Excellent. I appreciate the recommendation since my PlayStation 3 is getting heavy workouts only these days as a DVD player, so I do need good game recommendations.
Oh, yes. Well, if you like the Uncharted series, it's the
same
company. Yes. So
well, you know, we share a lead, right, between Haven and the Uncharted series, and
that's right.
Last year too.
Yes, and one of my favorite episodes, actually.
Yeah, that was really a good one. That came out really well.
It was quite well.
Yes.
So, for our listeners that aren't familiar with you, Charles, could you please introduce yourselves to them and tell us a little about it yourself and how Hard Case Crime books came out of that?
Sure. My name is Charles Ardai, and I started out years ago as a video game reviewer, believe it or not. When I was a teenager, I wanted to be a writer, and the only category of magazine that would publish a 13-year-old kid was video game magazine. So I wrote a quarter of a million words about video games. This was back in the days of Pac-Man and Donkey Kong, so it was really easy to write about them. And then I started writing fiction, mostly mystery fiction, because it was my real passion in life. I was also a science fiction reader, but I was really bad at writing science fiction, but I could write mysteries. And so I started writing for Ellery Queen's Mystery Magazine and Alfred Hitchcock's Mystery Magazine, these old sort of heirs to the pulp throne. And I used to collect old issues of those magazines and also old paperback novels from the 40s and 50s, 60s with the lurid pulp covers, beautiful women, tough guys with guns, short, typically very short novels. 200 pages was a long one. And the storytelling had all the velocity and all the appeal of a good movie. The dialogue crackled and so on. And those books were published and they were hugely successful between 1945, end of World War II, and maybe the mid-70s. And then they vanished. And this was a category of mostly American popular culture that just vanished overnight. It's as if movies had vanished overnight, if Broadway shows had vanished overnight. And of course, that didn't happen, but these books did. And so many years later, in 2001, winter of 2001, I had just exited an internet company I created called Juno, which if any of you have ever received an email message that has an address ending at juno.com, that's something I created. And I spent 7 years running that company. And I was going out to drinks with a friend of mine who had worked on Juno with me. And we started talking about what we wanted to do next, what kinds of things we wanted to do. And he and I both love these old pulp novels. And after enough drinks, we said to each other, hey, if nobody else is publishing books like those and we love them, why don't we publish a bunch? Wouldn't it be fun? And we thought it was just a lark. I mean, this was just a pure labor of love. It hardly had the possibility to turn into an ongoing self-sustaining business. But with enough drinks in you think these things are good ideas. And then the next day we should have forgotten about it. But that was 10 years ago. What is it? Not even 10, 12 years ago. And here we are. We're still doing it. We just published, I think, our 80th book. And 2 of them were written for us by Stephen King, who is one of the world's most popular writers and deservedly so. And other writers have included people like Mickey Spillane and Pete Hamill, Lawrence Block, Donald Westlake, Ed McBain, some of the real giants of crime fiction. And then some who were deceased, who we never got the privilege to work with while they were alive, but who had unpublished work in their drawer, their archives, and so on. Like James M. Cain, who wrote The Postman Always Rings Twice, one of the great classics of crime literature and also crime movies. And he had a book that he wrote at the end of his life that never got published called The Cocktail Waitress. And it needed some editing, but it was a terrific book. And we brought it out last summer to considerable success. And we're just ridiculously proud of that we could publish a new James M. Cain novel 30 plus years after the man died. But of course, what we're here to talk about more than anything else is Stephen King. It goes without saying. And the story there is that when we were first getting started, we published our first books in 2004 and we acquired them in 2003. So in 2003, when we were just kicking off the line, we knew what the books were going to look like and we knew what style they would have, but none of them had ever been in stores. We got in touch with Stephen King through one of the people who works for him. I think it was an accountant, a financial manager, something like that. And we reached out and we said, we're bringing out this line of books that we think you're likely to enjoy because we've read essays you've written in which you talk about your passion for pulp crime fiction and old paperbacks. And of course, we read The Dark Half, which was inspired by the dual identities of Donald Westlake and Richard Stark. Donald Westlake wrote comic mysteries about a hapless thief named Dortmunder who kept trying to steal valuable things and failing. And Richard Stark, his other identity, wrote really brutal, vicious, mean, ruthless, dark novels about a thief named Parker who succeeded in stealing things. And this inspired, it's not an accident that Richard Stark, the pseudonym, his last name was Stark, right? And if you know Dark Half, which of course the two of you do well, the Stark name was picked up. So we knew that Stephen King had a passion for these books, at least as great as ours. But what we didn't know was whether he would want to have anything to do with us. So we sent a note to him and said, listen, you have no reason to work with us, no reason to do anything for us. It's asking a favor and feel free to say no. But we think you're going to love these books as much as we do. And one thing that you could do is provide a blurb. If you wrote 4 words, literally 4 words would be plenty. These guys know pulp. That's it. That's 4 words.
Yeah.
If you say something short that we could put on the cover of these books, there are authors you loved, Stephen King, you loved growing up, people like Day Keane or Peter Rabe, whose names don't mean anything to people anymore. They were bestsellers in the 50s, 60s, but today nobody remembers them. Right. Earl Stanley Gardner. People might remember Perry Mason, his great creation, but they don't remember his name. But if we put your name, Stephen King's name, on a book, and we say, that he has an interest in it. Maybe some readers who know Stephen King's name but don't know Day Keane might pick up a book by Day Keane. So it's a way of reviving the work of people who matter to him and matter to us. And then we sent the package, and we sat back and we waited 3 or 4 months, and I concluded that we would never hear back, and that's completely reasonable because, for heaven's sake, Stephen King must have everyone and his uncle battering down his door making requests.
Right.
And who was I to him? Nobody. But then we got a call I got a call from Chuck Verrill, who was Stephen King's agent, and said, Steve asked me to give you a call and let you know he received your package, but he does not want to write you a blurb. And he paused, and I filled the silence by saying, thank you for calling. It's very kind of you to say, not to just leave me hanging, but you didn't have to. And he cut me off and said, because, completing his sentence from earlier, because he would like to write you a book instead. And that has to rank up there with my wedding day, birth of my daughter, with, very special announcements. And it was terrific. Of course, I tried to play it cool. I tried to pretend that this is the kind of thing I heard every day twice. But inside, I was doing cartwheels and backflips because not only am I a huge fan of Stephen King's work, I mean, the writing is wonderful. I think the first book of his that I read was It, which is a high point to start with. And I just fell in love with his work. So the idea of getting to publish one of my great literary heroes was exciting in and of itself, but I also knew what it meant for the line, which is that it really would, and in the end it did, put us on the map. It brought us to the attention of millions of readers who might otherwise never have heard of us or never given us a chance. That book was The Colorado Kid, which later, 4 years later, inspired the TV series Haven. It was a sort of loose inspiration because many of the characters and many of the events of the TV show have no ancestor in the book itself. But it was the inspiration and the idea that not only could we publish a book that became a bestseller and introduced millions of people to our work, but also play a role as a producer of a TV show that's now going into its 4th season. It's very, very exciting. It's really been a phenomenal adventure.
What is your working arrangement with Stephen King now? Does he contact you with when you have something, or?
Well, it's not like it's happened so often that I can speak about a pattern. It's only been twice. So there was The Colorado Kid in 2005, and then 8 years passed, right? Now, we stayed in touch. Periodically, we'd send each other email. It wasn't a working relationship. It was just friendly. And, of course, it went without saying that I would have loved to publish a second book by Stephen King, but I didn't want to be pushy, and I didn't want to nag. And he knew that I was interested. There was a point at which, before Blaze was published by Scribner, it looked like we might get to publish Blaze, which would have made a certain amount of sense because that really is a crime novel, very much in the old style. It ended up published as a Bachman book, last Bachman book by Scribner. And there was a point at which Steve described a plot that he thought might work for us. And it turned into the novel Duma Key. And by the time he finished writing Duma Key, it, of course, was much more a sort of classic Stephen King novel and a very long one. And Scribner was definitely the right publisher for it. And the original germ of the idea that became Duma Key ended up evolving in ways that had very little to do with hard case crime. Mm-hmm. And so I thought maybe one day, if I was very lucky, I might get to publish another book, but I certainly didn't want to push, and I didn't push. And then I got an email message last summer from Steve saying, I just finished writing a book. It's called Joyland. It's set primarily in an amusement park, and I think it might be a fit for hard case crime. Would you like to take a look at it? And of course I said yes. And it turned out to be a perfect fit. What he couldn't have known, except through telepathy, which I don't put past him, we'd been looking for years for a Carney novel. So there's a subcategory of pulp crime fiction called Carney novels, and these were novels set in or around carnivals. Now, carnival could mean different things in different settings. Typically, the classic carny was a traveling carnival. You would pack up a set of train cars and send them on the road, and they would travel around America, and they'd set up a midway, a freak show, and maybe some performances like animal training and that sort of thing. Actually, animal training wouldn't show up too often, but you would see once in a while a flea circus, right? That was the animal you'd get in a carny. Then there were circuses, which would have out-and-out animal trainers, and the traveling circus had a kind of kinship with a carny. And then there were fixed fun fairs or amusement parks, the pre-Disney amusement park. Mm-hmm. All of these had in common that they were on the periphery of honorable society. They were filled with con artists and grifters. Bad things happened there. Good kids who went there sometimes never showed up again. And so they were a wonderful setting. The classic Carney novel was Nightmare Alley, which became a classic film noir as well. But there were plenty of others. And we wanted to do one, just like we wanted to do a boxing novel, which we eventually did, Casino Moon. We wanted to do a burlesque novel. We did. It was called The Corpse War Pasties. We wanted to do a Carney novel. But all the Carney novels we could find either were well known, when there's no point in reprinting a book that everyone's read already, or they were not well known. They were really obscure, but they weren't very good. Right. And so the key was to find a Carney novel that people hadn't read and was good. And we hadn't found one for years and years. We were looking, and then along comes Stephen King out of the blue and says, "Here's a manuscript, read it," and it's a Carney novel. So it couldn't possibly have been better.
Right.
And I told him this. So and it's a book that I'm a hard-boiled guy in some ways and a softie in others, but I don't generally cry when I read books. But this one actually made me cry. And I'm secure enough in my masculinity to admit that it's a heartbreaking final scene. It's a heartbreaking book in several portions. The story of a 21-year-old facing dangers in a carnival is exciting or moving. But when you look back on it from the perspective of a 61-year-old whose life has mostly passed, and he's thinking back to when he was young and idealistic and full of adventure and discovering love, and you see how these things have ebbed away from him in the year since, that's truly the tragedy of life. That's really what all of us face. We don't all face vampires and werewolves, but we all face age. Yeah. We all face time. And I think Steve's vampires are outrageously terrifying. I think the zombies in Cell were scary, and not just because he was kind enough to name one of the characters after me. But I think he's at his best when he's writing about true human catastrophe, the breakdowns in relationships and the things that happen to real people in the real world. That's the stuff that really breaks my heart. And this book, Joyland, is full of that. And so I hope people read it and enjoy it for that element. Yes, there's a serial killer. Yes, there's a climax that's very cinematic and very exciting. And when Tate Taylor films it, I'm sure it's going to be a bang-up close to a bang-up movie. But it's the quieter moments, the things that feel like the wrenching moments in Shawshank Redemption, or the wrenching moments in The Body, or the wrenching moments in The Green Mile. That's the stuff that lives with me forever. And Joyland is just chock full of that sort of thing.
Right. That's very interesting. So taking into Stephen King's ability for telepathy, does he know, do you think he knows that you would openly welcome another book by him?
You mean after this?
Yeah.
Oh, yes.
Because I'm trying to get a sense of what your working arrangement is. Basically, it's just like an open thing right now. You don't push him, but he just sort of comes to you. And if he has a book that you're interested in, that's where it stands right now?
That's right. And I think that would be true for any publisher, but it's certainly true for a small publisher.
Mm-hmm.
We're grateful for what we get, and we wouldn't presume to either feel or appear entitled. We're lucky to have had 2 books, and if it's never more than 2, we still feel very fortunate. I personally do. That said, of course, I would love to do a third. And when Steve was in New York doing a small amount of promotion for Joyland, he asked me, please don't set me up for a lot, but I'll do a little. He doesn't enjoy that. He loves writing. He loves telling stories. The actual promotion is not his favorite part of the business, but he did a little bit with us, and he was very kind to do it. And while we were waiting in the green room at the Today Show, which was one of the things he did, we started talking about some of the upcoming books he's writing. And no, I won't tell you anything about them because he would kill me. I think you've carried a little bit on the website about the next one, but you didn't hear about it from me. But no. We talked about it. So the next one, based on what you have heard about it, you know that it also is a crime story in a number of ways. I guess all of his books have crimes in them, but it's a bit more of a crime story. And needless to say, I would have been delighted to do 2 in a row, but that's too much to hope for. And I know that one's already been sold to Scribner.
Mm-hmm.
He did tell me about one other. I don't remember whether he said he actually wrote it and finished writing it, or he's part of the way through writing it, or he just made some notes and put it aside. But he did mention one other book that he thought might potentially one day be a fit for us. But remember, he also said that about what became Duma Key. So who knows? I would love to do another one with him, and he does know that. And at this point, he's also a friend. We've worked together now twice, and closely and well, and he's a good guy. It's always fun to work with friends. So entirely apart from the fact that, look, Joyland is the number 1 bestseller on the Times paperback bestseller list. That's a tremendous thing. So as a business matter, this is a very powerful way to keep hard case crime going, because you sell enough copies of one book by Stephen King to publish 24 others by less well-known writers. And I know Steve cares about supporting younger writers and forgotten writers at least as much as I do. So there is the economic portion of the relationship. But the truth is, if there were such a thing as a Stephen King novel that did not sell well, I'd be equally proud to publish that one. I would be, I'd be honored to work with him on anything.
Yeah, as you mentioned, this has some supernatural, this Joyland book. Was that more in early draft? Was it toned down, or was it different?
No, there were changes from the first draft to the last, but they were all very small. They didn't affect the plot in any significant way. They were things like taking out anachronisms. The book is set in 1973, so at one point there was a reference to the Make-A-Wish Foundation, which hadn't opened until the early 80s, so that had to come out. There were things like that, but it was all small stuff of that sort. it's true that we have never published a book that had an element of the fantastic, the supernatural. We haven't done science fiction, and we probably never will. But of course, all rules are made to be broken, and if anyone's going to break them, Stephen King's the person to do it. So, I have rejected books over the years, including from some prominent authors saying, listen, your book's good, it's well written, but we don't do fantasy, we don't do horror, we don't do science fiction, and we don't do supernatural. And now if somebody sends me such a manuscript, I say all those things, and then I put in parentheses, unless you're Stephen King. And you know what? Nobody ever complained. They get it. They understand.
Yeah.
And in this case, one of the moments that did make me cry was tied into the element of the supernatural. Of course, I won't give it away for people who haven't read the book, but it's a ghost story, and slightly more of a ghost story than you're led to believe in the first 2/3 of the book. And I loved it. I'm not necessarily a fan of ghost stories. There are other kinds of horror novels that I personally enjoy more. But when done right, my God, they can be heartbreaking. So, I didn't have to tone that down. I wouldn't have dreamt of toning it down. If I had suggested toning it down, I can't imagine Steve would have said yes. And he would have been right, because it would have taken the heart out of the book.
I noticed in an interview you did recently with Omnivoracious, you talked about how Steve was so great to work with, and from a collaborative perspective, right down to getting the image right on with the book cover artist.
Uh-huh.
Did Steve make changes to the description of the photograph girls to make it match the cover more?
I think he was fine with the girl. He had no comments on the girl. The girl was painted beautifully by Glenn Orvik, and if there's one thing Glenn Orvik knows how to paint, it's beautiful girls. So,
yes.
No, Steve did not have to tailor the girl as in, maybe she should be slightly bustier, maybe her hair should be longer, nothing like that. On the other hand, when Susan Hewell, who's also a very gifted illustrator, drew, I guess is the better term, the map for the back cover of the limited edition collector's hardcover that we did, which was a tip of the hat to the old Dell map backs. There was a line of paperback novels from Dell Books in the 40s, 50s, and 60s that had maps on the back cover, which you can't do anymore because you have to have room for the UPC code, the barcode, and you need marketing text. But back in those days, you could do anything.
Right.
And so they always had maps. And I said, I want to do one of these books, but I can't do it on one of our paperbacks that has to be in stores because I have to make room for these other elements. And so we saved it for this book, which was only sold to collectors. It was not in stores, so we could do whatever we wanted. And she drew the map, and I went back to Steve. She drew a rough draft of the map, and we went back to Steve, and we said, "Does this look like the amusement park you envision?" And he came back, and he had comments. And the mirror maze should be on the other side of the wax museum, that kind of thing. So he did get involved in the map. So we can say with confidence the map is to his satisfaction. And then the cover copy, he wrote some of, Who Dares Enter the Funhouse of Fear was a collaboration between him and me. He came up with the first version of it, and then I tweaked it. I forget the difference. I can't remember exactly what the wording was, but that one was both of us. But the tagline on the hardcover was all him. I came up with one I liked. I sent it to him, and he came up with this one that we both liked better, which was Beyond the Lights, There is Only Darkness. Now, the interesting thing about that is it is a ghost story, and so it's not actually true in the book that beyond the lights there is only darkness, right? It's in this universe there's something beyond, after death there is something. But that's okay, because the wonderful thing of, first of all, it's just evocative, and second of all, it's a great pulp tradition to have covers, including both the images and the text, that have nothing whatsoever to do with what you find inside the book. That's great. So one of our first titles was called Fade to Blonde, and we were dying to put a redhead on the cover, just because, it's like, say it with bullets and you show a person with a knife. Yeah. We didn't do that, but the taglines were Steve's work. And then I guess we did tweak the front cover image. Originally, the killer was on the cover too. If you go to Huffington Post, you'll find a little essay our cover designer wrote about, or an interview he did about the design of this cover, and some of the preliminary sketches are there, and you'll see that the position of the woman hasn't changed, the background hasn't changed, but in the original draft, instead of looking out at us and we're the killer, and she's shocked seeing us, she's looking back over her shoulder, and the killer's in the distance in the background. And that works too. There's nothing wrong with it, although it looked a little too much like a poster for a slasher movie. Right. But the bigger problem was there was no room to put the cover, to put the title. And so we took the killer off the cover, not so much for aesthetic reasons, because we had to put the title somewhere. You can't have the book without the title. Right. So that wasn't Steve's request so much. But the typeface, he preferred having his name written in sort of cleaner block letters rather than swooping script. We tried a few different versions. So he definitely got involved. It was very much a collaboration, but not so much how the girl looked. The girl was great from the beginning.
Okay.
Joyland is 283 pages, which is about the normal length for a book for you. How would you handle if Steve came back with a book like 500 or 1,000 pages like his normal books?
Well, I'll
Would you
tell
be
you
able to do
this.
that?
Yeah, I'd be fine. That would be great. I'd take it. I'll tell you, we published the longest book we ever did last year, and it was 700 pages long. So it's not like we've never done it. We only did it once, but it's not like we've never done it. That book was kind of a special case. I almost rejected it sight unseen when the agent sent it to me and said, this is a 180,000 word book. And I said, that's crazy. Don't you understand? Our books are 60,000 word books. That book is literally 3 times the length of one of our normal books. I could publish 3 books, and that would be that length. And the agent smiled and said, just read the book. And so I started reading the book, and it was really good. It's one of the best we've ever published. And the first 60,000 words I'm reading, and it's a crime story very much in the style of George Simenon, he was Belgian. And then at the 61,000th word, it switches completely. And now suddenly I'm reading a book that reads like Raymond Chandler. And then 60,000 words later, it switches again. And it's a book like in the style of Jim Thompson. And sure enough, what this author had done was write 3 entirely separate crime novels, each one 60,000 words, put them together in a single volume. And the conceit of the book, it's called The 20-Year Death by Ariel S. Winter, and it's amazing. And in fact, Steve gave a blurb for it, a very enthusiastic blurb that's on the front cover. The concept is, what if you had these 2 characters and you read 3 different books about them by 3 different authors? So it's like 3 different classic crime writers writing about the same 2 characters at different stages in their lives. Mm-hmm. And it's a wonderful book. So we have done a 700-page book. If Steve wanted to top that with an 800-page book, I would have no problem. But I will say this. So it's funny the things reviewers say. The reviews of Joyland have been terrific, and I'm very grateful for them because people really have loved it. It's a very positive. I mean, sure, there are 1 or 2 negative, but overwhelmingly they've been positive. But almost all the reviewers have mentioned what a skinny book this is, what a thin book this is. Yep. The funny thing is, it's actually long for us. It's not that this is the average length of ours. This is long for us. Our typical books are either 224 or 256. So 283 is actually longer than 90% of the books we published. And the funny thing is, for all of our other books, reviewers have not said this is a skinny book. They've not said what a thin book. It's only because Steve is known for these big doorstop-sized books. That's the only reason they say it. But it's bizarre to me because you see a review saying something like, "What a thin book! It's almost like an expanded short story for Stephen King." And what are you talking about? It's 283 pages long. That's a novel. You know, back in the day, if you read classic novels, read The Great Gatsby. The Great Gatsby is what, 200 pages? Of Mice and Men is 200 pages. Yeah. You know, there was a day when a novel was, now granted, Great Gatsby is a little closer to a novella than a novel, but still, there was a time when you didn't weigh books to judge their quality. You read them. Yep. And I think Joyland is very much a throwback to that old style. All of our books are throwbacks to that old style. I don't need to know what Philip Marlowe's childhood was like. Mm-hmm. I don't need to, you know, if I'm reading a great crime novel, if I read the crime novel equivalent of a heist movie like Ocean's 11, I want to know how they robbed the casino. I don't want to know what their childhood was like. So this idea that a crime novel has to be 400 pages long and go into, you know, deep psychology, I think it's just misguided. That's not to say a book like that can't also be good, right. But there's a place for a really well-told story that you can read in a night. And I think that's a great thing for a book to be.
Absolutely. Yeah, I agree with you. I think those comments are more about Stephen King's reputation than your line of books.
I think you're right. Now, having said that, 1123, 2263, am I getting the numbers right? God, I hope so. Was extremely long. It made my wrist sore. I carried it on a train down to Washington, D.C., and I loved every minute of it, and I didn't wish it to be a page shorter. So Steve has talent equally, as everyone knows from reading his short stories, right? He can write a 10-page story that rocks your world, and he can write a 1,000-page book that rocks your world. It's really just a question of what serves that particular story.
Absolutely. And he writes it so well that I think the remarks that it feels like a short story is just because you're so into it that it's over before you know it.
Yeah,
that's a sign of a good story. So, and it's interesting that you mentioned the 11/22/63 as a risk breaker, because one of the maybe minor controversies from Joyland is that Steve announced there wouldn't be an ebook version of it produced. And was that a collaborative decision? And has a controversy about that died down at all, or are you still hearing about that?
It's pretty much died down. Like stories like that play out, and you know, after everyone's said it once, how many more times can you say the same thing? It's not like there's much more to the story than that. Yeah. I will say, just to be fair to what Steve actually said, he said initially there won't be an ebook edition. He didn't say there never would be. It's not like, I think Woody Allen at some point when VHS tapes first appeared said, my movies will never appear on VHS tapes. And it took 10 years, but eventually they did. And he went back on it. George Lucas said, I don't like, because they used to do pan and scan, so the left and right edges of a movie frame would be cut off. And George Lucas said, I'm never going to put Star Wars on video. And then eventually he did. So Steve, knowing those experiences and others, didn't say, I'll never do it. He said, initially, I want people to have a first experience of the Joyland story that resembles my first experience when I read books as a kid. I read them in paper, and I want people to read this in paper. That's a very reasonable artistic choice. It was Steve's idea. It wasn't my idea, but I wholeheartedly endorsed it. And what he said was that's the initial way the book will come out. I'm not saying there won't eventually be an ebook. Probably there will. But the initial appearance of the book, like, when a book comes out first in hardcover, generally people don't get up in arms and say, this is terrible. It's only in hardcover. I want a paperback. They understand. A year later, there'll be a paperback. Well, eventually there'll be an ebook. I'm sure there will. It's just a question of when. But in the meantime, people have had the opportunity to have their first experience this way. So it was kind of a non-controversy. But that said, I was a little surprised at how much attention it got. But I'm not against attention. So
good press.
Right. We didn't do it for this reason, but in retrospect, it turned out to be a way to get a lot of attention. So I won't complain about it.
Mm-hmm. Are you looking after the ebook edition, or will that be handled by somebody else?
Well, Steve hasn't announced what he's going to do with the ebook edition yet, and as soon as he announces it, we'll all have something else to talk about, I guess. And then, of course, I guarantee the stories that appear in the press will be Stephen King goes back on his decision not to. You can't win. You can't win. Yeah. I'm not against ebooks. I don't read them myself. I don't like them, but I'm not against them. And I know that there's an entire generation that's growing up now for whom ebooks are either one of or the predominant forms of text reading. People are used to reading text messages. They read email. They read books on a screen too. And there's nothing wrong with that. I don't read stone tablets. I don't read scrolls. I read what I grew up with, and kids will read the kind of books I love on ebooks. In fact, I'll tell you something. 50 years from now, some latter-day Charles Ardai is going to nostalgically create a retro line of ebooks that resemble the old Kindle from back in 2013. And people will say, why is it only available on Kindle and not in, neural implant form? And then they'll get in the Wall Street Journal that way.
You mentioned earlier there the movie version of Joyland that been talked about a little bit. Was there ever any talk about doing a TV series like Haven from...
Well, I talked about it briefly, very briefly. I talked about it with the folks who did Haven, just to play with the idea. It's a thought experiment. You obviously, you have to think about these things. But this particular story, to my mind, lends itself less well to TV than to film. And if you've worked in TV for a while, worked in film for a while, you get a feeling for which stories are feature stories and which ones are TV stories. And one of the determining factors, it's not the only one, but one of them is the story closed-ended or open-ended? Does the premise of the story suggest 12 different plots and then another 12 for the next year? Or is it basically one story about one character and what happened to that character, and when it's over, it's over? Now, it doesn't mean the character has to die, but basically, although that's the extreme form of it. Mm-hmm. But, like you read a novel about a thief like Parker, the Richard Stark character. He robs a bank in one book. He can rob something else in the next book. And you can easily imagine 12 episodes in which he robs 12 different places. That's easy. If it's a detective story, you can easily imagine 12 different cases for the detective. But Joyland is the story of one kid coming of age. It's one young man who faces his demons and some other people's demons and grows from the experience and looks back on it from old age. So just like the Green Mile, can you imagine a Green Mile TV series? It's kind of hard. I'm sure it could be done, and I'm sure Joyland could have been done, but it just didn't feel like the natural way to do it. And clearly it didn't feel that way to Steve either. I'm sure he got offers. I'm sure he got many offers, in fact, including both TV and film, and this is what felt right. I could imagine Under the Dome, and sure enough, that's turned out quite well, I think, for TV. I could imagine 11/22/63. I mean, that is sprawling, and so much of it takes place in the past, and the time travel element gives you a lot of ways to go back, a lot of ways to, frankly, to re-watch the same episodes with slight differences each time is a perfect TV model. That's great. It would even be cheap shoot, because you get to you shoot out of sequence, so you reuse the sets for shooting the different versions of the same scene, and it's natural for TV, and I think that was the plan, although I don't know what it is now. But Joyland feels like a movie to me. It feels, in fact, like a terrific movie to me. So I'm hopeful that Tate Taylor does a nice job.
I would just throw out this idea.
Sure, give it.
It's an amusement park with a spooky fun house that grants people's wishes. Think of a twisted fantasy island that has the makings of.
I love that idea, and in fact, that was one of the things that the other producers of Haven and I threw around just behind our own closed doors for the fun of it. We said, sure, can you imagine a TV series set in an amusement park?
Yeah,
that's not hard.
Yeah.
But the amusement park is kind of secondary to the story of Joyland. It's the where, but it's not really the why and the how. And so I think you could do an amusement park series. I think it could be a lot of fun, but it wouldn't be Joyland.
Right. Yeah, well, we always have Carnival, which was
that's right, exactly, and
great series,
and it wasn't that successful. You know, it was great,
yeah.
It wasn't successful.
Yeah.
So I'm not ruling out the possibility of an amusement park TV series at some point, and who knows, maybe Steve would even want to be involved. But I don't think it's going to be Joyland. Now, I'm going to eat my words if Tate Taylor's movie comes out, it's a huge success, and then some network decides, hey, let's make a TV series out of it.
Exactly.
I would have said, off the top of my head, I wouldn't have thought MASH. You know, after watching the feature version of MASH, I wouldn't have guessed that would have been a great TV series, and it ran for 12 years.
Right. Yeah.
So, you know, you can be
okay.
surprised.
Is there anything else about Joyland that you would like to tell us about that we don't know yet, or anything else about Hard Case Crimes that they have in the works that you would like to tell the listeners about?
Well, I appreciate the chance to do it. Joyland, I think, is best experienced by reading it, not reading about it or hearing about it. So I would just encourage everyone who hasn't gone out and bought a copy to do it. I was startled to see, although I shouldn't have been, that on Amazon, where the cover price, I think, is $12.95 like everywhere else, they're selling it for under $7. So in fact, I got an email message from somebody saying at one point, I prefer ebooks for price reasons. It's not just that I can make the font larger. I like the price of ebooks. And I said, listen, I'm not against ebooks. Buy them all you want. But if you go on Amazon right now, the ebook of Dr. Sleep is on pre-order for, I don't know, $7, $8. And you can get Joyland in paper for less than $7. Don't talk to me about price. Don't buy it if you don't want to buy it. But don't tell me it's not cheap enough. This is one of the rare cases where you can buy Stephen King's brand new novel for $7. You can't get a movie ticket for that price. So before Amazon wakes up and realizes that they've done something really dumb, go buy it. Now, you don't have to buy it from Amazon. I'd be thrilled if you bought it from your local bookseller. But if you don't have a local bookseller or you want to take advantage of the low price, by all means, it's available. No fan of Stephen King has an excuse not to read this book. I can imagine people who don't like ghost stories or don't like nostalgia or whatever it is, but anyone who reads and loves Stephen King should read and love Joyland. Now, in terms of other things we've got cooking, in October we have our second female author ever. You wouldn't think after 80 books we'd only be up to 2 female authors, but we are. It's called The Secret Lives of Married Women, and for anyone who was curious about 50 Shades of Grey but thought it was too poorly written, which by the way it was, this is a book that takes the hard case crime view of the forbidden allure of submission and is extremely well written, and people might enjoy this one, with a cover by the same great Glenn Orbeck who did Joyland and The Colorado Kid. So that's our next title following Joyland in October, and we have a couple of other really exciting things that we're cooking up for 2014 as well. I'll only mention one of them. It's a year away, so don't start holding your breath for it now, but there's a legendary film director named Samuel Fuller. Oh, yeah. Not everyone remembers his work. The two of you probably have crossed paths with him occasionally. He wrote and directed Shock Corridor, The Naked Kiss, The Big Red One, which was one of the great war movies of all time, Steel Helmet, wonderful movies that inspired Quentin Tarantino in a big way. They were friends. Martin Scorsese, Steven Spielberg, Francis Ford Coppola, all of these men owe a lot of their inspiration to Samuel Fuller. Well, Fuller also wrote novels, and at the end of his life, he wrote one called Brainquake that was never published, or at least not in English. He was living in exile then in France, and it was published in French, even though he wrote it in English. And it never was published in his home country, in his native language. And I couldn't tell you why, but we have this book, we have the manuscript, and we're going to bring out, for the first time ever in English, the last novel by this great writer-director, Samuel Fuller. And I think anyone among your listeners or readers who is a film geek is going to be doing their own version of my cartwheels and backflips when they hear that there's a very cool Samuel Fuller book coming out. I would love to put it in the hands of some of these guys like Tarantino and Scorsese, because I think they're going to go crazy for it. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So that's what we've got cooking, and you've got so much. I come by the site and read it and see all the exciting news. Sometimes things I haven't even heard yet, which is hard, right? You would think I would hear these things first, but not always. And I'm always happy to come visit. So you do a good job.
Thank you. I just want to comment also that you said that no fan of Stephen King has no reason not to read Joyland. I would I'm a
big fan of the triple negative.
Yeah. I would also like to say that Joyland is a great book to start reading if you haven't read Stephen King before. I think it's a great way to experience him for the first time.
I think that's probably true. And I also think I'll go even further, not to make it sound like it's everything to everyone, because I'm sure there's someone for whom it's not the best book. But I would say people who haven't picked up Stephen King because they think he's a horror novelist, and maybe they're turned off by the prospect of violence or whatever it is, this is not a terrifying book. It's not a horror novel. There are elements of horror in it. There are certainly elements of the supernatural, but the tone of the book is much more emotional than it is horror, and the emotions aren't horror. So I think there are readers who like the novels of Nicholas Sparks who might like this book. You know, it's basically in some ways a love story, right?
Yeah.
So there are people out there who might never have picked up a Stephen King book who would love this book. There are people who might think of Stephen King as irreligious who might like the religious elements of this book. I think this is a very rare, very special book.
Yeah, I agree. You are also involved with Haven, and 4th season is going on. Is there anything else you're involved in except Haven?
Well, yes, Haven, right. I told you in advance I couldn't tell you anything about the 4th season. You've been very good not to ask me questions. 4th season is shooting now. I think we're filming the 6th episode now. It'll be a 13-episode season as the previous 3 were. I've read the scripts through number 9, number 10, and I've given my usual comments. That's the job of a consulting producer. I read them and offer my 2 cents worth, which is sometimes worth 2 and sometimes 1, sometimes nothing. But it's going to be a good season. People will be excited. They'll be excited to see some of the returning characters. They'll be excited with some of the new stuff we've got cooking. And they'll have some surprises in store for them. That I guarantee. Even the ones who have started guessing what could possibly be the consequence of the barn being destroyed and Audrey and Duke vanishing at the end of season 3, they will not successfully predict the answer. I am going to go out on a limb and say they will not successfully predict the answer.
That's great. Those are the best types of shows that you can't figure out what's going to happen next.
I hope. I mean, they're not going to predict where 401 begins. I'll tell you that, where episode 401 begins. They won't get that. After watching the first 4 or 5 episodes of the season, some of them who are smarter than we are might outthink us, but it'll take a few episodes. But anyway, so season 4 is very exciting. I think that's kicking off in the fall. Other things, I do have my own life as a writer, and I haven't been writing books as much for the last 3 years because Haven's been on the air. So all my book writing time has been replaced with TV writing, which is great. But I'm not, in fact, writing an episode for this season of Haven, and one of the reasons is that it will give me the time to write my next book. So hopefully, I can't tell you yet whether it'll be a hard case crime book or not. In some ways, I hope it's not, because I love my line, but if I write for my own line, the book's not eligible for certain awards because there are awards like the Edgar Award given by the Mystery Writers of America. Books that are deemed self-published aren't eligible. And since I own the publishing imprint, it's self-published. So it's a crime novel. I'll sell it to someone else. But in any event, there should be another Charles Ardai book. I know the world is not breathlessly awaiting the next Charles Ardai book the way they are the next Stephen King book, but you got to start somewhere. And for the 8 fans I do have, I think that might be fun news. So bit by bit, there will be some good new stuff out there. Oh, I'll give you one last tidbit. About 2 years ago, when we were working with a different publishing company to put out hard case crime books, we created a sister imprint, sister line, to revive another genre that you didn't see in bookstores anymore, which was high adventure. Back in the 30s and 40s, you used to see these stories like Doc Savage and H. Rider Haggard or Edgar Rice Burroughs, these breathless stories of adventure, lost civilizations and lost cities and artifacts, basically what inspired Spielberg and Lucas to do Indiana Jones. Right. So if somebody reads those books now, they think, well, this is an Indiana Jones story. Well, there's a reason they think that. It's because they inspired Indiana Jones. And the question was, why don't you see books like that in stores anymore? You don't even see Indiana Jones novels in stores anymore. And so we created a different character named Gabriel Hunt, and he would go around the world finding lost artifacts and so on. And we had a blast doing it. We had screenwriters working with us. David Scow, who wrote The Crow, did one. I wrote one. A bunch of other people who aren't coming to mind wrote others. Raymond Benson, who was the first American ever to write an authorized James Bond novel, wrote one of them. Krista Faust wrote one, and so on. And the books came and went, but they came and went quickly because the publisher was going out of business at the time. They were in their death throes, and so the books didn't get out very much. And we switched to a new publisher named Titan Books. And they've done a wonderful job with hard case crime. And so I said, well, you know what? Why don't you bring back the 6 Gabriel Hunt novels? Nobody's read them. The first one, maybe, 25,000 people read. But after that, the books got practically no distribution because the publisher was dying. And they said, great. They read the books, loved them. And so we're going to bring out all 6 of the Gabriel Hunt adventure novels with new covers and give them a fair shot at finding an audience. And they're great fun. It's as different from hard case crime as you can get. And pretty different from Stephen King's work, but this is hairbreadth escapes, cliffhangers in every chapter, lots of fist fights, jumping from a horse to a moving truck, that kind of stuff. And if you like that sort of thing, you've got to read these books.
Cool. Are they set in the present day? Or?
Yes, they're set in the present day, which is an interesting challenge because that feels so much like the stuff of the 30s. And so we had to find places on the planet where you didn't get good cell phone reception, or the cell phone gets smashed under the wheels of a truck or something, so that you didn't have the internet. Well, there are little intrusions into the books of computer hacking and little bits like that. Gabriel Hunt's sister is a computer hacker, but mostly it has the feel of the old adventure novels, and I hope people just squint when they read them and pretend that it's the 1930s. But we felt, rather than trying to really do Indiana Jones with the setting and time, let's set it in the modern day and just have it, in the spirit of. And they're fun. They're not great literature. I won't pretend that, but they're great fun.
There's nothing wrong with that. I wish you the best of luck with that.
Thank you.
I want to thank you very much for your time. Yeah. This has been a great interview.
It's a pleasure.
Yes, your energy and enthusiasm speak well of why your book line is doing so well. And maybe we can get you and the rest of your Haven gang back on later in the year, closer to the air date for another interview.
I don't know when I'm going to be in LA with them, but if I find out that you're going to be doing an interview, or heck, this is Skype, I can be on camera from home. We'll do it that way.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I just want to reiterate what Hans said. I found Joyland was a great book and very emotional, much more like in the Shawshank Redemption mode. Because Stephen King obviously wrote it from a perspective of an older man looking back at his younger days, and I'm a bit younger than King, but I could really appreciate that perspective, and I really enjoyed the book quite a bit.
I'm so thrilled, and I hope all your listeners do too.
Yeah, I surely do. Yeah, thank you so much for joining us.
It's a great pleasure. Talk to you again soon.
Okay, take care. Thanks, Charles.
Thanks. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye.
This is great. What's our job? We'd like drive around, pick up stiffs or what?
It's time for reviews from the night shift.
Okay, so that was our interview with Charles Ardai from Hard Case Crimes, who, of course, just released the Joyland book that we were talking about. And now, since the book has been out for a while, Hans and I thought that we would give our thoughts on the book. So, Hans, overall, what did you think of the story?
I think it's a great story. Once again, it's a story that shows King's ability to tell a story that's normal, for the lack of better words. That just it's like you get a glimpse of a person's life who's not too strange, but still a little bit strange. But he has that ability to let you join in for a while, and then you leave them. And I think it's a great story. And as we mentioned in the interview, I think it's a great story for both diehard fans of Stephen King, people who haven't read any Stephen King or very much Stephen King.
Yeah, it's really a story about loss and the passage of time and regrets. And I think everybody can empathize with looking back, and regardless of what age you are, obviously if you're older, you have a greater span of time to look across, but I think everybody looks back at their life at certain points in their life and wishes, boy, I wish I had done this differently, or I wish things had turned out differently, and I had something really good and that got away from me. And this is what this story is really about. So it's, even though it does have a slight supernatural element to it, it's much more a very relatable story about having something that in your life that you at that time were really engaged with or involved with. It's a bittersweet. You remember the great times that you had while it was there, or that person was there, but then you also have to look at all the time that's passed since then where that special thing in your life no longer exists. So, and it's not just about a person, it's about a place as well, and a idea. And like the whole idea of amusement parks has disappeared really with these, at least in North America. I don't know what it's like for you, Hans, over in Europe and that, but the idea of an amusement park, now people just think really of going to Disney World and things like that. There's still some big ride kind of parks, but the whole amusement park thing has really died out. So it's about a lost time, a more innocent time as well. So it's a great story. As I said in the interview, it's 283 pages, but it just feels like a short story because you're so into it, and it's so well written, and you just really get involved in this one summer where Devin Jones has to basically grow up and move forward with his life. So I like the fact that I know nothing about fairs and stuff like that, but and I don't know how much Steve King knows himself, but when you read this book, it's you believe what you read, that this is really how it was at those places at that time. So it's a very believable story, and I like that. And it's fun, as Charles mentioned in the interview as well, that this is considered like a thin book, but it is based on the normal Stephen King book. It's a short book, but it's almost 300 pages, so it's definitely a book, not short story. So we both highly recommend it.
Definitely, definitely.
Right.
Okay, time has come for Under the Dome. On June 24th, it aired on CBS. Lou and I have talked about it a little before this podcast, and we have somewhat different opinions about it. Why don't you tell me what you think?
Okay, well, remembering that this is being presented to people who've never seen or read the book, the purpose of a pilot is to set up the premise of the show, introduce us to characters, and set up some of the overarching mysteries that are going to run through the season. And on those counts, and by that criteria, I thought this was a very solid pilot. So I was quite impressed with it.
Yeah. Well, I was somewhat impressed with it as well. I don't mind so much the changes that has been done from the book, as a lot of fans were, because even Stephen King went public with a text about the difference and why they were necessary. But it's a good. It looks very nice. The pilot. The dome is great when it comes down, and you really believe that there is a dome there, and when the truck smashes into it, and so it's without any question, it's a very very good looking pilot.
Mm-hmm.
But I had some problems with the characters, like Angie. I didn't like her a lot. She felt very strange. I know it's just the pilot episode, and you have to give the characters time to grow, and they were just announced here, and I'm willing to let it go. I'm definitely going to check it out, so I'm not giving up on it. But I didn't like the character Angie, or the actress who played her, that much. I felt that like Junior, he worked as a crazy guy, but the way to become crazy was a little bit too fast for me, because he went from this caring, loving guy to total psychopath in like 5 seconds. So it felt a little strange to me, and I'm not, and I know this is a change from the book as well, and I don't mind the change in itself, but I don't like the change that they have chosen, that he kept her in the basement. I don't mind that they change it from the book, because I understand that they probably can't show that on TV since it's pretty brutal and stuff. But it feels like they painted themselves in a corner somewhat by sticking her in the basement. They can't come any further on that. But as we know, this is a pilot and things might change, but that's my initial feelings for the pilot. Mm-hmm. So I'm happy with it, and it looks good, but I'm not as happy as I could have been if that makes any sense.
Sure. Expectations are always hard to keep in check, especially when you've read the book before you see the show. I will say that I've seen your complaint about not so much the girl character, but more just that whole storyline. Yeah. In general, people are not interested in something like that in this type of a show. And I mentioned to you that it looked like in one of the previews that I think they're going to resolve that fairly quickly and in a different way. I do agree with your complaint or quibble, I should say, that the speed at which Junior Rennie goes from zero to crazy seems awfully quick. This is something that they could have maybe moved over or spread out over 3 episodes and gotten to the point where they are in the first episode. We can only assume that they have a lot of story to tell, so some things are going to get compressed, and this is one of those things. In general, though, I found most of the cast members well chosen. I like the kids. I also like the people at the radio station, especially the girl. She looks like an interesting character. She might turn out to be like the Hurley of Chester Mills. I hope that's going to happen. The family with the 2 mothers and the daughter was interesting. And I actually thought for the longest time that the black lady was actually the mother, and the 2 other girls were her daughters. But it took me a little while to realize that they were partners. Because her age of the one actress was hard to determine for me. Of course, Dean Norris is Big Jim Rennie. I think he's going to be fantastic. I knew it was coming because I had read the book, but I was really sorry to see Jeff Fahey get his pacemaker blown out by the dome. But because he's such a great actor, and he was really good on Lost, so I'm going to hate to see him go. The other actors still need to establish themselves. I think the lady, I think it's Rachel Lefebvre that's playing the reporter. She looks interesting. Seems like a strong character. And as I mentioned to Hans before we podcasted, the character I had the most problem with actually was the lead, which is, of course, Barbie. And I'm hoping it's more with how they modified his character from the book, because obviously showing him bearing that body is quite a different storyline than what was done in the book, where he was basically leaving town because he had gotten into a fight with some of the local toughs, had decided to leave. So his character seems to be a little more off-putting right now. I'm hoping that I'm going to warm up to him. But he seems to be much more of a military secret service kind of guy, special operations kind of guy than he was in the book. So we'll have to see how that plays out. And the numbers on the show were fantastic. I think it was like the #1 rated summer premiere in the last 20 years. And original numbers were like 13.7 million viewers. And I think I just read with the live day plus 3 numbers that climbed up to over 16 million. So
yeah,
from CBS's perspective, this gamble has paid off big time, and now it's just a question of when they're going to announce that they're going to do a second season. I think at this point, I don't think there's any doubt that there's going to be a second season based on how well the pilot did, but we'll have to see. Of course, if there's a great big drop off, that might be a different story, but I think right now with most of the shows, the big shows are already finished their seasons, and the summer shows starting up. I think Under the Dome is in really good position for another season.
Yeah.
Whether you think that's a good thing or a bad thing is another issue, but
yeah, exactly. Well, I think as this being the pilot, I think that the high ratings are maybe more of
curiosity,
judgment of how they have promoted the pilot, because I think they draw a lot of people in by their promotion. So if the ratings stay as they are with like episode 2 and 3 and 4, then they have a success. But if, let's say, if like 90% of the viewers were disappointed with the pilot and the ratings drops, then I think the high numbers are more showing of that they did a great job promoting the show. So it's a little bit, and I don't think that the numbers say so much about the pilot, really. I think the numbers for the coming episodes are more showing how much people like it or don't like it.
Well, we'll have a good idea after the second episode airs.
Yeah.
From the forums I visit on the web and on Twitter and that, I haven't seen any negative comments. Most people say they're intrigued enough to watch the second episode. So I think from that, admittedly, small sampling, things are looking good for the series at this point, though. I haven't heard anybody outright come and say that show sucked. So.
Well, I've had some comment on, I think, my Facebook page that they were very disappointed with a lot of changes that were done compared to the book.
Yeah.
And I must say, earlier, like 10 years ago, I was more disappointed if there were changes made when a book was turned into a movie or a TV series. But today, I think it's okay to do changes, but I don't always like the changes. But that is not because they are changes, but because they are bad changes.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah.
If in the TV series, and we've seen, like you already talked about with Junior Rennie, you can, especially with a book that's over like what was it, 1,000 pages, you can expect compression and characters to be smaller characters to be collapsed into one character just for streamlining in that. So and some things that work well in a book you just can't do in a TV show. So like interior dialogues and monologues and whatnot, things like that. It's really hard to do that in a visual format. So as long as it captures the main themes of the book, I'm fine with the character changes. I mean, for myself, the change I like the least right now is what they've done with Barbie so far. But I think that's just a slight twist that's gonna get it straightened out fairly quickly. I think, because I really don't believe he killed that guy, but I think he just came in, or somebody else killed him while he was meeting with the reporter's husband. So we'll see how that plays out. And the same thing like with Angie and Junior Rennie, I don't think she's going to get killed. I think it looks, from what I've seen in the previews, that Barbie's going to rescue her. So we'll have to see how that plays out as well, which will set up an interesting thing, because you want to set up a tension between the characters. But how do you make this Junior Rennie character interesting by being kind of psycho without turning him into a cartoon character, which they might be in the danger now. And who knows, he might be one of the characters that will die this season.
Yeah.
And based on how crazy he is right now, that seems like a big possibility. So. Yeah.
One thing that I reacted on was that the actor who played Big Jim, who I forgot the name of now.
Dean Norris.
Yeah. He was smaller than I thought he would be.
Mm.
I haven't seen him in anything else, and on
Okay.
the pictures that's been published, I thought it would be bigger, but he was quite short, and that was something I reacted to. But that doesn't have to be bad.
No,
Uh,
it's the image that he projects that
Exactly.
counts, and I think we already saw a little bit of that tension between him and the sheriff. So
Yeah.
he's good at manipulating people.
Exactly. My I have two worries after seeing the pilot, and number one is that since it was so good looking, this pilot with the dome coming down and everything, they have set the standards pretty high, and I hope
Mhm.
they can live up to that in the coming episodes. So it wasn't just this first episode that looked this good, and then we will go to be like any normal show. I hope they will keep this up and give us a big treat for the eye as well as the story. And my second concern, which is bigger, is that, and I can't really point the finger to why, but when the episode was over, I didn't really get that feeling that you get from some series that you need to have the next episode right now. You want to see it right away.
Mhm.
I felt like, oh, okay, it's a week to next episode, and that's quite okay.
Mhm.
That worries me a bit, but hopefully everything will straighten out in the upcoming episodes. So
I can hear what you're saying with that second point. I think it's left most of us just more like I'm interested to see where it goes, but it's not like, oh, I got to see where it goes.
yeah,
I think that's hopefully will come in the next couple episodes as we get more involved with the characters. As far as the looks of the episode, I think after the first couple, that's not really going to be an issue because I don't think we'll be spending that much time at the dome itself. Just maybe a reminder shot every once in a while that it's there. But
yeah,
most of the story is going to start taking place within the town and not out at the outer rims of the dome. So I think from a special effects point of view, if people are watching this series and hoping to see big special effects shots every week, I think that's going to become somewhat of a disappointment as the series progresses because like the story's going to move into the town and away from the dome.
yeah.
Like there'll
I
be
think you're right about that.
establishing shots, but they can reuse those quite a bit because they're just showing you the outside of the dome.
Yeah.
I guess what I'm really curious at this point is how much of outside of the dome are they going to show us? Are we going to have stories taking place outside of the dome? Or is that something that, based on the track record from Lost, because it's the same executive producer, the first season might be focused totally just on the characters inside the dome. And then maybe in the second season it might move out. This is all speculation on my part. I'm nothing to back it up, but
Yeah.
that might be an interesting perspective to take because King never really did that much, and that is something that the TV series could explore, which could be quite interesting, especially if
Yeah.
the source of the dome is from something else different than what was in the book. But we'll have to see how that plays out.
I think that will be more and more as longer the series goes on. Like if it
Mhm.
came around season 5 and 7, I think
Oh, I don't think
there
they'll
will
wait that
be
long.
no, but the longer we go, the harder it will be to get, because you can't get any new character inside the dome,
This is
and
true.
you can't have like 10 people hiding under a rock and just pop out in season 3 and
Mhm.
something like that. So the more and more people will die, and we need new stories, and the more and more we have of that, I think we'll move outside the dome.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's and we have no idea of how they're going to run with this idea of the dome either. Maybe the dome moves to another town. Who knows?
Yeah,
You know,
yeah.
like there's so many
Could
different
be.
ways. Yeah, there's so many different ways they could go with it. So very curious to see how that plays out. But if they keep it really true to the book and focus on this one town, I can't see the series running more than 2 or 3 seasons. But I mean, I just sort of went through the same thing with Hannibal on NBC. I was watching that, and I kept on saying to other people that were watching it, I don't see how this can go on longer than 1 season because this guy, Will Graham, he's going slowly insane. And at some point, he's going to either crack or he's going to figure out that Hannibal's been manipulating him. Well, by
Yeah.
the end of the seasons,
Yeah.
that was an interesting place to leave the end of the first season. If they could do something like that, that would be kind of cool. But we'll have to see.
Yeah.
But in general, it was a solid pilot. I wouldn't say it was spectacular. It doesn't have that lost, grab you by the throat, I got to find out what's happening vibe to it. But I thought it was very competent and did a very solid job of making us believe in the dome and presenting us with the characters and their problems. So
Yep. I'll definitely be checking out next week.
cool. So there you have it, folks. Hope you all agreed with our evaluation of the pilot, and please feel free to comment and let us know how you're feeling about the Under the Dome series so far.
Yep.
Questions?
Do you leave the light on after bedtime? 'Cause I get a little scared in the dark sometimes. If it's a strange play.
Okay, that's it for another podcast. We hope you have enjoyed it, and as usual, please comment, tell us that we are right or wrong in our thoughts, or in this case, like with Under the Dome, that we are both wrong or both right, since we have different opinions. Next time we are going to talk about Ghost Brothers of Darkland County and review that book and CD and DVD and everything about it. And we are going to talk about the episodes of Under the Dome that's been aired between now and then. So if you have any comments, questions, thoughts, anything, please send them in to us. And until then,
Stay safe, but stay scared.